Hello there everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Joesephyr and welcome to another Should You Pull video for Dissidia Final Fantasy Opera Omnia. Now, I can't think of another character quite like this one where I've been really excited for them and yet probably not sure how I'd recommend them to other players, as I would with Kadaj. Now, Kadaj is brand new coming to Dissidia and obviously from Final Fantasy VII Advent Children, so it's the first time we've seen a movie character appear in the game, but he also comes with some very interesting caveats that we've never really seen before in Dissidia. So if you'd like to find out more about Kadaj, why I love him as much as I do, and yet why I think the way I do about him in Dissidia, and of course the Lufenia mission that comes along with him, then stay tuned and keep on watching. Now before we get started, of course, don't forget to check out all of my social links in the description box below, including Twitter, Twitch, Discord and Patreon. I stream 5 days a week nowadays, including every event for Dissidia as it comes out, Final Fantasy XIV up to twice a week, and of course my Final Fantasy count-up that I do every Friday. I'm actually very rapidly approaching the end of Final Fantasy IV, and I'm hoping to get started on Final Fantasy V in the same time that Bart's comes out for Dissidia Final Fantasy Opera Omnia as well. And I'm considering taking a look at the 4-job Fiesta as a way of kind of celebrating that as well. If you've ever heard of that before, then perhaps consider popping a quick search in and you can have a look at it, because I'm still learning about it as well, so we can all learn about it together. Of course, with Patreon, I always shout out one of my patrons every time I release a new video, and today that person is going to be Sergeant Tuffy, who is brand new to my Patreon, so a massive thank you goes out to you, and is a fellow FF14 fan with Gunbreaker Thancred down there as well. Obviously, we have a lot in common. Now, if you'd like a title card made just for you to go at the end of all of my videos, including shout-outs I do at the start of each one, various other benefits like being a part of Would You Pull, we do voice chats all together, one of which will in fact be happening tomorrow, and all other sorts of other things, so perhaps you might like to consider becoming a patron as well. Don't forget to check out all of the other social links all around me for various other content creators, and of course all the other content creators for YouTube, etc. They're just scrolling up below me right now. So let's take a look at the banner Kadaj and what it is he does and what he has to offer to Dissidia Opera Omnia as a whole. Now, the banner itself will contain all of Kadaj's gear, his brand new character, so LDEX 1535, Golbez and just his BT, as well as EXs for Maria and Alize. Now, Maria will come back on Kadaj's Lost chapter as having the LD, and honestly I'm still grumbling about the fact that Alize hasn't had hers yet. But we'll get to that nearer the time as and when that comes around with Kadaj's Lost chapter, but right now it's just their EXs. Now, Kadaj is honestly one of my favourite characters in Final Fantasy, and I know it's weird because he's a movie character and not a video game character, but honestly, like, look at him. He has me written all over him. He's narcissistic, he's androgynous looking, he's a little bit crazy, and he's a villain. Like, this is a Joe character if ever I ever saw one. But Kadaj is a debuffer based character, so he has some very unique capabilities as a debuffer that we'll go into as we go through the actual kit. Now, his skill 1 and skill 2 actually do very much the same things, except in the way in which they do damage. So Fusillade is a Brave gain followed by an AoE Brave HP attack that does split damage and grants the Obsession debuff to all targets and gives himself a buff called Unconscious Sentience. Now, Unconscious Sentience is quite nice. It raises his bravery, his attack, his initial bravery, and gives him bravery gen, which is quite handy. Now, Obsession is a very interesting debuff. Now, Obsession has 5 levels on it, and the second you stop targeting that target, or the target that you're attacking with it, the Obsession level goes back down to 1. So in multi-target fights, you'll need to kind of pick and choose who you give the Obsession buffs to at a lot higher level than 1. But even at level 1, it's actually got a really unique mechanic that no other character really has, which is while the Obsession debuff is on them, whenever the enemy gains bravery, Kadaj steals 50% of it. So not only does that keep Kadaj safe, but whenever you come across enemies that gain bravery frequently, it neuters them in a lot of ways. Like, it makes so they only get half as much as they would do normally. Now, when you go to leveling it up, so you level it up to 5 by using the various skills, you normally get 1 or 2 levels whether you use any of his skills or even his Brave HP pluses, you'll get defense down 20%, attack down 20%, physical defense down a further 20%, which obviously helps him out, and then at Obsession 5, whenever he attacks that character, you'll end up with a follow-up attack called Eclipse, which is a 4-hit Brave HP attack that follows up that gives you Brave Refund after you've done it. So basically, you have to pick and choose in multi-target fights which characters you're going to put the Eclipse onto. Now you can actually get around this slightly by using his C65, because that will grant additional levels of obsession, so that you can then use that to change target and then go into with another attack, and then you'll be at obsession 5 again. But just be cautious how you go about giving that obsession level 5 buff. Then Chaotic Slashes is a 4-hit Brave HP attack that's inflicted twice after C60 and everything, that has splash damage on it and does largely the same things, inflicts the debuff, gives him the buff, etc. But as you can see here, when it comes to the actual buffs and such, the Fusillade just gets more Brave hits, and Chaotic Slashes doubles up on its attacks. So whether you want split damage or like a harder hitting move with splash damage is entirely up to you. And then when it comes to the C15 and 35 like weapons, all it does is make them so that they're stronger and that the buffs last for longer. His EX is actually one of my favourite EXs in the game, and that's not just because the animation for it is absolutely badass and I love it. Like, I cannot tell you how much I fangasm over Kadaj's EX animation. But Kadaj's EX, first things first, reduces all targets' bravery to 0 before the attack goes off, so it's an instant break, no matter what. Split damage, which isn't great in this day and age, but it's multi-HP attacking, so it's not as bad, and it does still trigger the Eclipse follow-up as long as you're targeting the enemy that has Obsession 5 on them. And then it inflicts the target with another debuff called Stigma. Now, the actual debuff itself is a Bravery Sap, so again, keeping in theme with Kadaj stealing Bravery, lowers their attack even further, so it defense down 40%, attack down 40% as long as they're using physical attack, or as long as you're using physical attacks against them. It's pretty good. And then it also increases the bravery damage they take by 20%, which is also fantastic. But it also, while Stigma is on the enemy, any debuffs that Kadaj inflicts to the enemy become what they call gilded. Now, what you may have seen this in videos over in JP, because Sephiroth does this after his rework, and so does Kadaj. What a gilded debuff is the same thing, except it just cannot be cleansed whatsoever. And unlike, I know that framed debuffs typically don't get cleansed either, but that's usually only by not being able to be overwritten. Whereas bosses, by and large nowadays, tend to cleanse themselves of debuffs very regularly, whether you're hitting HP thresholds or their moves do it. They actively get rid of debuffs, and they can't do that to gilded ones. So while Obsession at level 5 and Stigma together, it doesn't actually take up that much space on the enemy as well, so you have room to use other debuffs as well. So you're getting Brave Sap, attack down 40%, defense down 20%, physical defense down 20%. Then you also get the follow-up from Obsession 5, and of course you get the Brave Stealing as well. It's consolidated very nicely. However, it isn't the hardest hitting move in the world, and if Stigma runs out, then Obsession can then be removed as well. And then with the EX Plus, the bravery hit count increases as you would expect it to, so you deal a little bit more damage. You also get free skill uses after you use the EX, which is great because it does help with Kadaj's longevity rather a lot, because otherwise you're just burning through skills. He gets an HP and a bravery attack plus, where the HP plus is a 2-hit brave HP attack, so not the best at this day and age, but it does increase the obsession levels by 1. And then you also get to start with 80% of your EX gauge filled, so you'll typically use the LD first, and then you'll go straight to having the Divinity, the EX straight away. And also the enemies start with Obsession from the start. And at 3 out of 3, just to make sure you absolutely get those gilded debuffs on them, it has the decency to remove buffs from the enemies as well. So you get a little bit of Dispel with Kadaj as well. So he's like a bit of an all-rounder debuff character that has a couple of unique things about him. Now with his LD gives him, it's a multi-hitting Brave HP attack. The LD board doesn't do a huge amount, it just makes it so that it hits harder. You're going to want it because it hits harder and it gives a third HP, or it gives an extra HP dump. But you also get to go to Obsession 5 straight away with this because it inflicts 4 levels on it. So you go from 1, because you start the fight with it with the EX, straight to 5. And then you also get an additional special effect on him, which is meant for him, called Mother's Coffin, and it's this will last for 12 turns after Power Stones, and you only get 3 uses of this, and that's not fantastic really. You should be fine with 36 turns worth of this buff, but there may be fights where you might have to pick up the pace in terms of damage in order to keep hold of it, because you're gonna want it for Kadaj to be able to deal a lot of damage, because it raises his attack, it raises his Brave Overflow, it raises his bravery increases his bravery damage, so that you can get more refund out of it to make his follow-up deal more damage, depending on how much Obsession debuff is on the enemy. So he will need to have Obsession 5 on one of the enemies at all times. So you just got to be careful with that. The LD actually, it's more raising Kadaj's stats than anything else, but you are still going to need it. The real kind of draw to Kadaj is that EX because of that like instant break, so making sure that they don't gain bravery, they go straight to 0, break, gilded debuffs. The gilded debuffs are nice, but they are a little bit gimmicky. If the gilded debuffs are what you're waiting on, honestly, I think that Sephiroth's rework does a better job of carrying these than Kadaj does. But if you like that kind of thing, it doesn't mean he's bad in any way or anything like that. But the main thing you're wanting him for is the Obsession debuff. The Obsession debuff, the stealing bravery, making it so that they can't gain bravery very easily. It's like a nice, more offensive version of, say, like Arciella's LD debuff, where they can't gain bravery at all, because instead of them not being able to gain it, they can gain it, they just give a load to Kadaj instead. And because you have the Brave Sap on top of it with Stigma, there's lots of little ways of consolidating these debuffs into doing a lot, considering how little space they take up. And certainly, once we go into having 8 debuffs instead of 6, you'll find that you can actually consolidate him quite nicely with other debuffer characters. His damage isn't fantastic, it's okay, it's not brilliant, and quite honestly there is a character that has come out that we weren't expecting, that JP didn't get, that if you've got her, then Kadaj becomes a lot less desirable, which is Serra. Kadaj has all these nice debuffs and things like that, but he doesn't increase the party's HP or bravery damage, really only his own. He's got nice moves and stuff like that, but he doesn't battery the party, only really himself. He's like a weirdly selfish debuffer, but the things he does selfishly are actually very intriguing. Like I said, Obsession is a fantastic debuff. It is really good. But if you have Serra, you're going to be throwing debuffs out a lot anyway, and you're going to be able to get that Brave HP damage, and all those auras, and all that other stuff. If you've got all of that, then Kadaj is slightly less needed. Now, one thing I think that Kadaj is very undervalued on is actually his call ability. His call ability puts the Obsession debuff on enemies. Both his LD and his regular one do it. Now, the actual buffs that you get from them aren't fantastic. Like, you get a bit of Brave Overflow and stuff like that's pretty much it. You don't get an awful lot out of it. And you get damage. But having the Obsession debuff on enemies, there are certain enemies that we've come across that gain bravery very frequently. Now, obviously, Obsession drains the bravery onto Kadaj, not the character who's calling him. So therefore, you're not going to be able to steal the bravery. But it does mean that they're only ever going to gain half as much. It's like a reverse Camlanaut call, where instead of you being able to get loads back after attacking, the enemy's just not going to be able to gain half as much. And when you're against certain fights that gain bravery or very large amounts of bravery very quickly, having access to the Obsession debuff, even without the gildedness because you don't have the EX on there or anything, I actually think is very valuable in certain fights. So if you're going for Kadaj and you're worried that you're not going to use him in your main party as much, I definitely think his call abilities are at least worth looking at because of their uniqueness more than anything. Obviously, you're not going to be able to get to Obsession 5 unless you use... Well, you're not really going to use that, but Obsession 1 is actually very strong on its own anyway. And then in terms of his high armor, he has Tactics Keystone, which I would put on him. I would put that on him, because it means that you get a little bit of extra bravery damage. He's not exactly going to cap out all the time, but if you have a battery-based character in your party, he pairs up very nicely with 9, as a matter of fact, because 9 has the support capabilities that Kadaj doesn't have, and yet Kadaj can make it so that they're the pair of them together are actually very safe. But his high armor plus increases his bravery and HP damage limits. I don't think I would give this to him on the back of the fact that he's not the best damage dealer in the world, therefore he's not going to be capping particularly frequently unless you've set things up for him to do so, at which point you could probably use a different character to do that. It's alright, but I wouldn't go out of my way for it. So now let's have a look at the Lufenia mission that comes along with Kadaj and his LD, etc. Now, if you've fought the Basilisk or Kotobel Pass enemies in the past, the Oros Camilla enemies are just big versions of them. And they do the thing that you really don't want those enemies to do, which is petrify. Basically, you need to keep debuffs on these enemies at all times in order to stop them from doing their nastiest things. Now, bearing in mind that this is Kadaj's event, they also gain bravery very, very frequently, both before and after their attack. So having Obsession on the enemies is designed so that you're able to mitigate how much that happens. They also, like, every 10% of their damage, so from 100% all the way to 0, so 90 or 89, 79, 69, etc., they're going to cleanse all of their debuffs. So the idea of this is that you put the gilded debuffs on them so that they're not able to cleanse them, obviously playing into the unique capabilities of Kadaj. Now, you don't necessarily have to do a lot of these things. The enemies also have framed turns, which means that they can't be delayed or anything. They can be delayed by break, but they can't be delayed by regular means. And their Lufenia Orb asks that you put a debuff on the enemy. As long as there is at least one debuff on the enemy, the Lufenia Orb is not going to be an issue for you. But if they're not debuffed when their recast gauge goes off, it's going to inflict Petrify on one of your characters, which you absolutely don't want because it renders them unusable for a significant period of time, and it's very, very bad for you. Now, not only do they cleanse their debuffs every 10%, but after 80%, 50%, and 30% HP, much like Ultimisia's bosses and characters like that, so the aspects, things like that, they'll gain a buttload of bravery and they'll only take 1 damage unless they're broken instantly. So what you need to do, again, this is designed around Kadaj, where you would normally use his EX, bring them to 0, and then you'll do bravery damage, and then they're out of it. You'll want to bring something that instant breaks along with you. Gabranth is a really good shout for this. Just bear in mind that because they cleanse their debuffs frequently, you'll need to reapply them so that you're able to then break them with his skill 2 or his EX or his LD, etc. If you have 100% gravity damage, then that's going to work really well for you as well. You just need to make sure that you're able to take their bravery down to 0 and then hit them. Calls like Caius are actually going to be absolutely fantastic here because you get the debuffs and the instant break. Jack, for the same reason, it's an instant break and there's a debuff on them. You can actually get around it altogether though, because if you take both enemies down below those thresholds at the same time, which is quite tricky, but it can be done if you're using characters like Golbez, characters like Serra, characters like Terra, characters like that you can do that. If you take them both under the thresholds at the same time, they don't get that aura where they reduce brave damage to 1 and they gain loads of bravery. So you can go about it that way. So you've got multiple aspects and facets of which you can do it. I've actually seen loads of players use 0-turn strategies where they've used characters like Golbez, Terra, like Lightning, the characters like that where you just stop the enemy from gaining, like being able to take a turn at all just because you can take quite so many, and because the Lufenia Orb is very easily maintained, because as long as they've got a debuff on them, like Terra does a debuff with both of her skills, that if they're not getting any turns, they're not going to be able to cleanse it, so you only ever have to worry about those 10% HP thresholds for you to be able to get past them. Kadaj will make it so that you're able to just get around everything all at once. But, honestly, if you have Serra, this is a mission you're going to want to bring Serra to. She does loads of debuffs, she's got the party buffs active. Cecil will also do really well here because of having the massive damage increases and things like that. Healing, obviously they do a lot of HP attacks, brave and HP attacks to stop you from being able to just render them redundant. So if you have Cecil available, then you'll be able to use him here. There's actually quite a wide range of characters that you can use, and if you have a burst available, then you can use that. It just depends on what you have access to, but you're going to want to bring somebody that can debuff the enemy very quickly and isn't reliant on like their EX or their LD to do it, because obviously if they cleanse every 10%, then you're not going to necessarily have the stuff available as and when you need it. But as long as you're keeping and maintaining debuffs on a regular basis, then these guys should be fine. So now, of course, we come to the big question. Should you be pulling on Kadaj's banner? Now, I would like to pull on Kadaj's banner, and I'm a huge fan of Kadaj, and even I'm only going to still be using tickets on this. I think Kadaj is extremely interesting to play. I think he's very unique. I think that the Obsession debuff is very fun to play around with. I think his EX is absolutely fantastic. The fact that it reduces bravery to 0 before doing the attack, and then providing the gilded debuffs on top of it. I think the gilded debuff mechanic is a bit gimmicky, if I'm honest. I don't think it's ever a huge deal, and even if people consider that it is, Sephiroth with his rework will get something very similar sort of within the next month or so, so you might want to consider waiting for that. But I think that the combination of things that Kadaj does makes him very unique, and honestly there aren't very many, if any, characters that play the same way that he does, and I adore the character, which obviously shows some level of bias, but even despite that, I still don't think that people should go out of their way to pull for him. As I said earlier, however, I do think his cool abilities are very undervalued by a lot of players because I think that Obsession 1 debuff, like cutting any brave gains that the enemy has in half, like if you remember the worms, the needle worms from the more recent boss rushes, or Kieran's Lost Chapter, enemies like that, you're going to want to bring something like this to it because it's going to make your life a little bit easier. But the fact of the matter is that Bartz is coming. Like, Bartz is coming, Tifa's coming, Galoof is coming. This is probably going to be the most expensive batch of banners we've seen for a long time in terms of you should really pull here multiple times. And therefore, I think that if you've got an opportunity to save, and because Kadaj is a new character, there's summon boards there as well as everything else, so you've got more stuff that you're able to gain from that. It's a chance worth taking, and you should probably be saving for Bartz. He'll still be live, like, after the majority of Bartz's batches have gone, like, not Tifa, but Bartz and Galoof. So if you really wanted to, you could come back and pull here if they've been nice to you. But also, Kadaj, the only other problem that I could really see with Kadaj is that we got an extra character that kind of sits on him a little bit, which is Sarah. Now, Sarah obviously doesn't have Obsession. She doesn't have the Gilded debuffs. There's a lot of things that, and she doesn't have like the Stellar EX that he does. But she doesn't provide that, but she does provide massive party benefits like the auras and the batteries and the brave HP damage up her LD was given for global exclusive. Kadaj doesn't do any of that. Like, yeah, he's got Obsession buff and all of that, but Sarah also has a lot of sap and poison in her kit as well. So quite frankly, I mean, I'm going against my own advice here because I love the character and I'm pulling tickets on Kadaj. But if I, as someone who has Sarah, I wouldn't recommend that other players do the same unless you love Kadaj like I do. And then finally, it's time for Would You Pull, the section of the video where you, the viewer, get your chance to let your voice be heard and let everyone know whether you would or wouldn't pull on a banner and why. Now, once again, a massive thank you goes out to all of my patrons who have cast their votes and their comments, and if you'd like to join in, obviously the link is down below for you to check out my Patreon as well. But this one is actually pretty split. Largely, people don't seem to want to pull gems on this banner, but I can absolutely understand why, given what's coming in the near future. But people are, like I said, this banner's pretty split. So to go into the numbers and not like make any more fuss about it, 12% of people said that they were going to use gems here. 35% of people said they were going to use 100 or more tickets. 30% said less than 100 tickets, and 23% of people said no. So it's actually pretty wobbly either way, but a lot of people are largely going to be spending something. So going into some of the comments, Goose says 200 tickets. Recent banners have been kind to me, so I'm happy to splash out for Kadaj. There's been a lot of chat around his gold frame debuffs, but what you're more likely to bring him for is his constant counter to brave gains. Stealing 50% of a marked enemy's brave gains is no joke, and he absolutely murders fights like Alex. So Alexander obviously does his 99999 bravery gain 3 times in a row, and yeah, Kadaj is going to help with that. His stacking debuff looks a little awkward to maintain in multi-target fights, but he seems like he does enough damage to justify a slot in a party even when he doesn't directly counter the fight. Even though he can perform though, I think he's a clear luxury unit. Fun to use and plenty viable, but you're never going to wish you had it if you skipped him. Yeah, and this is going to be, again, based on what characters you already have. If you have debuffers available, yes, like Alexander, the Gilded debuff in combination with the Brave Gains deal is going to help a lot with that, but if you haven't finished Alexander, that might be a reason maybe you want it. But honestly, I consider him a luxury unit as well, like as I've said already. So I think that if you want him, like I do, great. I plan on using because he looks extremely fun to use rather than him being mandatory. Tyro says, I'm going to throw less than 100 tickets to this banner. His kit's intriguing, and with the unremovable debuff, brings an interesting new mechanic to the game. Wish I could spend more, but Gold Bears was unkind, and banners that come after Kadaj take greater priority. And I think a lot of people are going to be in this. The reason that I'm not spending gems on this banner, even though I really like Kadaj as a character and I really like him, and I know that people will go favourites over meta in the chat and read me to filth or anything, but sensibility has to come into play somewhere. And with Bartz, Galoof, and Tifa all demanding gems pretty much, like one after another, something's got to give somewhere, and therefore we have to make sacrifices we don't necessarily always want to make. Raricio says, I'd love to pull for Kadaj because I love his concept in the game and I have a soft spot for Advent children anyway. Me too. Well, I went way too hard for Fujin with my Alexander tickets, which I regret because I didn't get a LD in the end, and I'm still waiting for Bart's to ruin my already dwindling resources. I might wait until Bart's releases and come back to this banner if I'm lucky there, but I have very poor self-control and the day one FOMO will kick in because favourites equals better over meta any day of the week. Now, I think that it's fine if you do get day one FOMO and you want to pull on stuff as long as you're having fun. I could make entire videos about why I don't always agree with the favourites over meta statement in terms of like the ability to enjoy the game in the long haul, like short-term goal versus long-term goal. I could make entire videos on that. Let me know in the comments below if you actually want me to. But I don't also think it's a bad idea if you are running low on resources, wait for Barts to come around. Kadaj doesn't disappear. If you don't pull a character day one, it doesn't mean you can't go back and get them later. I did that with Yang, and I am happy that I have Yang, but I would have been fine if I hadn't got him. So if you don't get Kadaj, then don't worry. You can always come back to him later or just skip him entirely. He is never an absolutely mandatory unit. However, Multiracial Lion feels very strongly about Kadaj, saying, I'm going in with gems. I don't like Kadaj's character, but I've played him on my JP account extensively because he's incredibly fun to play. He doesn't have a whole lot of hype around him, it's true, but I think it's because people tend to focus too much on his gold debuff mechanic and how he's never necessary and wasn't super popular in JP. After all, if he wasn't in 1,000 videos, he's bad, right? Wrong. Kadaj is a great pocket pick for plenty of fights. Enemy has frequent or possibly fatal brave gains or regen. Take it. For a lot of physical attacking enemy, Kadaj can hurt them with 40% attack down. They like to set bravery to 1 until you break them. Kadaj has you covered. His damage is solid, not insane like a certain someone coming up, Tifa, but never bad. Multi-target fights are no problem. His C65 will give you 3 stacks on the other enemy, making your next attack hit 5, and is a great candidate for your post-EX free skill. This is a surprisingly good character if you give him the chance to prove it, and you won't regret that you did. So, on the other side of the fence to what I was saying earlier, if you like Kadaj, and I like Kadaj a lot, then he is very interesting. He is very unique. He does cover a lot of bases. He just doesn't excel at any one major thing outside of the Obsession debuff. I actually agree in that people have focused too heavily on the gold debuff mechanic because I think it's a bit gimmicky. But the Obsession debuff and the EX, they're the main kind of focal points for me, and those call abilities. I think those call abilities are very undervalued, and I would like to have access to them for certain fights in the future. So that's going to be it for today's video. Let me know in the comments below if you're planning on pulling for Kadaj like I am, or like how far you're willing to go. I haven't decided how far I'm willing to go yet. I don't know. Hopefully he's kinder to me than Nine and Fujin were. But after that, it's the big boys. We're going into Bart's batch, and that's a scary prospect. So there's a lot. Well, it's an easy video to make because I'll spoil it now. Yes, you should be pulling for Bart's. He's exceptionally strong. But then a lot of his other banners are really powerful as well, so let me know which one of those you're saving up for. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell for notifications of any future videos I might be making. And don't forget to come and find me on Twitch as well, where you can find me playing Dissidia, as well as plenty of other stuff. So thank you all very much for watching once again, and I shall catch you next time. Take care.